My name is Mark Hudson. I'm 37, an IT specialist. Not the kind of guy who draws eyes in a crowd, but always the one people turn to when something breaks, or when the Wi-Fi goes down during a big meeting. People trust me to fix things. I've always liked that about myself, being dependable. I might not be loud, or flashy, or the most exciting person in the room, but I'm steady, grounded, a quiet kind of strong. That's probably what made Emily fall in love with me. We met a little over 10 years ago at a tech conference, of all places. She was working in marketing at the time, confident, stylish, the type who lit up a room. I was giving a presentation on server vulnerability patches. It was supposed to be dry, forgettable, but when I came off stage, there she was, waiting by the coffee station, pretending to look for sugar. She told me I looked like I needed rescuing. I said I probably did. We ended up talking for hours in the hotel lobby. Some people talk about lightning strikes or love at first sight. Ours wasn't that. It was something gentler, a slow burn, but strong, solid. She made me feel seen in a way I hadn't before, like I wasn't just wallpaper. We dated for 2 years and got married on a windy October afternoon in a park just outside Austin. It rained that morning, but cleared in time for the ceremony. She wore a pale champagne dress and tucked a blue flower behind her ear. I wore the only suit I owned. And I remember thinking, as I held her hands and said our vows, that I would do everything I could to keep her safe, to keep us safe. For years, we did everything together. Game nights with friends, lazy Sundays reading in bed, road trips with bad music and too much coffee. We built a quiet life. Our life. Even after all these years, we still exchanged little texts during the day. Things like, thinking about dinner yet? Or, you'll never believe what Susan from accounting just said. Nothing monumental, but full of affection. It made me feel like we were still a team. That's why I didn't think twice when she texted me the afternoon of the company dinner. Emily, running late. Ugh, don't start without me. Save me a glass of my favorite? I smiled when I saw it, even let out a soft laugh. That was Emily. Casual, slightly chaotic, but always with that familiar warmth. She hated showing up late to formal events, especially company things. She used to say dressing up made her feel like she was wearing someone else's skin. Still, she showed up when it mattered. That night was supposed to be a celebration. The company had hit some milestone I can't even remember now, probably revenue-based. The brass wanted something elegant, so they rented an old mansion downtown. Not just a building, they went all out. One of those Victorian-style places with a wraparound porch, wrought iron gates, and stained glass windows that filtered the light in dusty reds and blues. It looked like a movie set from the outside. When I arrived, the sun had just dipped below the skyline. The mansion glowed from within, golden light spilling through the windows. You could hear the soft hum of a jazz trio playing inside, upright bass, piano, and a sax that drifted into the night air like smoke. It was beautiful, the kind of place you almost whispered in just to match the atmosphere. I stepped in and was greeted with the scent of wine and polished wood. Waiters moved gracefully through the crowd with trays of bruschetta, stuffed mushrooms, little toothpick things I couldn't pronounce. There was laughter echoing from the grand staircase. Clinking glasses, polite conversations about quarterly targets. The usual work chatter, just dressed up. I grabbed 2 glasses of wine from a silver tray, one for me and one for Emily. Her favorite, a Pinot Noir from Oregon she always raved about. The kind she called dangerously smooth. I held both glasses in my hands and looked around the ballroom, expecting to see her walking in, maybe still tugging down the hem of a dress or adjusting her heels. But I didn't see her by the entrance. No coat check. No quick apology text saying she was stuck in traffic. Instead, my eyes caught something I didn't expect. In the far corner of the room, tucked into one of the rounded alcoves under a dim chandelier, there she was, sitting already, not walking in, not rushing to greet me, seated, laughing. Next to her was Thomas Whitaker, the new sales manager, freshly transferred from the Manhattan office just a couple of months ago. I didn't know him well, but enough to nod in the hallway or make a dumb joke during all-hands meetings. He was sharp, ambitious, A little too polished, in my opinion. Always had the top two shirt buttons undone like he'd just stepped out of a magazine shoot. Emily was laughing at something he said. Not just politely, really laughing. The kind of laugh that came from deep in her stomach. Her head was tilted slightly toward him, and her fingers played with the stem of her wine glass. She was wearing the red silk dress I bought her years ago. The one she used to call her danger dress. She only wore it on certain nights, anniversaries, date nights when we'd go somewhere nice. It was bold, attention-grabbing. And seeing her in it now, sitting in a booth with another man while I stood there holding her wine like a fool, did something to me. It tore at something I didn't even know was still vulnerable. I froze. I watched for a moment longer than I probably should have. Long enough to notice how close they were sitting. How her knee touched his under the table. How she leaned in when she laughed. How his hand brushed her arm as he spoke. And then I felt it. Not rage. Not yet. Just confusion. Dread. Like I had walked into the wrong version of my life. I took a step forward, still holding her glass of wine, rehearsing some version of, "Hey, surprise! Didn't think you'd already be here." Something light, casual, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. But as I got closer, I heard it, clear as day. Thomas, with a smirk in his voice, said, "Mark? Oh, come on. He's like furniture, always there, but nobody really notices." And then Emily laughed. Not awkwardly. Not in protest. She laughed like she agreed. Like it was true. Like I was some forgotten part of the room they both had long since stopped seeing. I didn't walk over. I didn't make a scene. I just walked up to their table in silence, set the second glass of wine in front of her without saying a word, looked Thomas in the eye, and gave him the kind of smile that says everything and nothing all at once. Then I turned around and walked away. I didn't need confirmation. I didn't need her to say anything. The way she looked at me in that moment, startled, caught, but not apologetic, told me everything I needed to know. It was betrayal, dressed up in red silk and laughter. I didn't go far, just stepped outside onto the back veranda, where a few guests lingered with cigars and quiet conversations. I needed air, space, a moment to pretend that what just happened hadn't happened. The night was warm, the kind of humid Texas evening where the air wraps around you like a blanket. From where I stood, I could still hear the jazz drifting through the walls, the clink of glasses and polite laughter. But it all felt distant, like I was watching it from underwater. I stood alone, wine still in hand, my own glass now untouched. I wasn't even sure how long I stayed out there. 10 minutes, maybe 20. Part of me kept waiting for her to come outside, to find me, to explain. She didn't. Eventually, I went back in. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. I couldn't hide outside all night. I had coworkers here. People who knew me. People who expected me to be, well, me. By the time I returned, Emily and Thomas were gone from the corner booth. Vanished. Like they'd never been there at all. I found an empty spot near the bar and stayed there, making idle chat with a couple guys from the tech team, nodding along, trying not to look like my brain was spinning 1,000 miles an hour. I smiled. I even laughed at a bad joke about server downtime. But I wasn't present. I kept scanning the room, looking for her. Not because I wanted to see her, because I didn't trust what I would see. About half an hour later, she reappeared. Alone this time. She walked in from one of the side halls, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear, that same glass of wine in her hand. Her eyes flicked across the room, and when they landed on me, she smiled. That smile. The one she'd used on me 1,000 times before. But something was off. It was too casual. Too rehearsed. Like she was trying to erase what had happened earlier. As if I had imagined it. As if she thought I'd be too polite to mention it. I raised my glass in her direction. Barely. She walked over, kissed my cheek like nothing was wrong. "Sorry I took so long," she said, her voice breezy. Thomas needed help finding the wine list. I nodded, said nothing. She didn't seem to notice. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. We made small talk with other couples, posed for a group photo by the fireplace. From the outside, we looked like any normal married couple enjoying a fancy night out. But internally, I felt like I was made of glass, cracked, waiting to shatter. When we finally got home, the silence in the car was deafening. She didn't bring up Thomas or the booth or what he said. I didn't either, not right away. I wasn't sure what I'd say if I did. Part of me hoped she'd break the silence. Say something. Offer even a thread of explanation. She didn't. At home, she kicked off her heels and started changing into pajamas like it was any other night. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, trying to figure out if I was being dramatic, overreacting. Maybe it really had been nothing. A badly timed joke. Coincidence. But then she said it, just as casually as anything else. "I'm going to be honest with you," she said, pulling her hair back into a messy bun. "There's someone else." Just like that. No build-up. No hesitation. Just facts. I turned to look at her, but she was facing the mirror, smoothing lotion into her arms like she hadn't just set fire to our life. My mouth went dry. "What?" She met my eyes in the reflection. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said. "It just did. I didn't want to tell you like this, but I figured you might have picked up on it tonight." I blinked. Once, twice, trying to grasp the shape of her words, but they felt foreign, too casual, too practiced. "How long?" I asked, my voice low. She sighed. "A few months." My stomach twisted. "Is it Thomas?" She hesitated. That half-second of hesitation was all the answer I needed. I stood up, walked slowly out of the room, hands trembling, into the dining area. I didn't even think. I just moved. And there, waiting on the table from earlier in the day, still unopened, was the small black envelope I'd left out for her. Her anniversary gift. I picked it up, walked back to the bedroom. She looked up as I entered, surprised to see the envelope in my hand. "Here," I said, setting it on the bed between us. "Happy anniversary." She didn't open it. "Mark." But I was already turning to leave again. She called my name once, softly. But I didn't stop. I went downstairs, sat on the couch, and stared at the dark television screen. My reflection looked like someone else. Pale, hollow-eyed, betrayed. Eventually, I heard the rustle of paper upstairs, and then the sound of her crying. I didn't go to her. I stayed exactly where I was, like a stone at the bottom of a cold river. The next few days blurred together. She tiptoed around me, made coffee like normal, texted me smiley faces in the afternoon, as if pretending hard enough might undo what she'd said. But I wasn't pretending anymore. Everything was different now. She started talking more than usual. About work. About the neighbors. She laughed harder at my jokes. Put her phone face down every time it buzzed. She said Thomas's name casually in conversation, like it was normal. Like he hadn't carved a fault line straight through the middle of our life. Every time I looked at her, all I could see was that moment at the table. Her leaning into him, laughing at a joke made at my expense. Her red dress, her wine glass, untouched. She tried to act like nothing had changed. But everything had. She started taking evening showers. She never used to. She bought new perfumes and said she got them on sale. She worked late more often, said she was training new hires. I never argued. I never accused. I just watched. She talked about resetting our marriage, maybe taking a trip to the lake house. "Remember how peaceful it used to be there?" she asked one night while folding laundry. "Maybe we could find our spark again." I nodded, said we'd see. But I already knew what I was going to do. I was done trying to win her back from someone she'd already given herself to. What I needed now wasn't closure. It was distance. That night, while she was in the shower, I pulled out my laptop and searched for divorce attorneys in Austin. I read reviews, compared rates, found one with a reputation for handling sensitive cases discreetly. I sent a message asking for a consultation. By the time Emily came downstairs in a robe, towel around her shoulders, I had already closed the laptop and was sipping tea on the couch like nothing had happened. She smiled at me. I smiled back. It was the easiest lie I'd ever told. One Saturday morning, 2 weeks after that night at the mansion, Emily said she was going to the gym. She tied her hair into a ponytail, slipped on her sneakers, and grabbed a water bottle. But she didn't fill it. I watched her from the kitchen table, pretending to read the paper while stirring a spoon through my black coffee. She wore makeup. Not a lot, just a touch of concealer and a hint of mascara, but it was enough to catch my attention. She hadn't worn makeup to the gym in years. Her gym bag was empty, no towel, no change of clothes. Her sneakers looked spotless, like they hadn't touched a treadmill in weeks. "I'll be back in a couple hours," she said, grabbing her keys without meeting my eyes. I nodded. "Have a good workout." She kissed my cheek out of habit, and I caught the faint scent of her new perfume. Sweet, floral, unfamiliar. The front door clicked shut. I waited exactly 90 seconds before grabbing my own keys. Following her wasn't something I'd ever imagined myself doing. I always thought of myself as someone above that kind of behavior. But trust makes fools out of men, and I was tired of being one. I kept a good distance between our cars. She didn't drive toward the gym. No left at the light. No turn toward the strip mall where she'd gone for years. Instead, she headed downtown. She parked near a small wine bar tucked between a bakery and a boutique hotel. A place we'd never been to together, but I'd heard about it, trendy and asterisk mate, overpriced. The kind of spot where dim lighting makes secrets easier to share. I parked around the corner, got out, and walked past the bar like I was just a guy out for a stroll. I didn't go in. Didn't need to. Through the tall glass windows, I saw her immediately, seated at a two-top near the back. Thomas was already there. He stood as she approached, leaned in, and kissed her cheek. She laughed as she slid into the booth. That same laugh from the mansion. The one I used to think was mine. They didn't touch much, but they didn't need to. The way they leaned toward each other, the timing of their smiles, the relaxed ease between them, said everything. She was at home with him in a way I hadn't seen in months. I stood there just long enough to feel it in my chest. Just long enough to know I couldn't deny it anymore. Then I turned and walked away. I didn't tell her I knew. Not yet. I wanted to see how long she'd keep pretending. When she came home later that day, she dropped her keys on the counter and told me the gym was dead, and that she barely broke a sweat. I nodded, asked if she wanted takeout. She said sure, maybe Thai. Her eyes didn't blink. That was the moment I stopped asking questions. The next week, she started acting like everything was perfect. She laughed louder, touched my shoulder when she passed by, texted me funny memes in the middle of the workday. But it felt off, like someone trying to plug holes in a sinking ship with silly putty. The real Emily, the one I married, she would have cried. She would have confessed. She would have broken down and said she made a mistake. But this version was just performing, practicing detachment. And that was almost worse. One night, she suggested a weekend getaway. "Let's go to the lake house," she said, her voice full of cautious optimism. "We haven't been since, gosh, before the pandemic." She smiled, like it was a gift, like a lakeside retreat could undo months of deceit. I agreed. I didn't do it for her. I did it to say goodbye. We left Friday evening. The car quiet except for the occasional rustle of snack wrappers and the soft hum of the tires on the highway. She made a playlist. Old songs we used to love. I didn't have the heart to tell her I couldn't listen to them the same way anymore. The lake house looked exactly the same, weathered with siding, creaky floorboards, the scent of pine needles clinging to the porch. The water was still, peaceful, deceptively so. We unpacked in silence. She wandered around like she was taking inventory of a life she barely remembered. She opened drawers, smiled at dusty picture frames, lit the old citronella candle we'd left behind last summer. That night we sat by the fire pit. She poured 2 glasses of wine, talked about her childhood, her job, her friends, but not about us, never about us. I watched her face in the firelight. She looked content. Not the remorseful kind of content, but the self-justified kind. Like she had rewritten the story in her head and made herself the protagonist. At some point, the silence returned. She stared into the flames. I stared at her, and something in me broke. "I know," I said. my voice barely above a whisper. She looked at me, confused. "No, what?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. We sat there in the flickering quiet, and I saw it settle in her eyes, the slow, creeping realization that the performance was over, that the audience had left, that the man she once knew was no longer playing along. She opened her mouth, maybe to explain, maybe to deny, but I stood up and walked inside. I didn't sleep that night, just lay there beside her, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun slow, hypnotic circles above us. I could hear her breathing, soft and rhythmic, like nothing had happened, like she wasn't tearing me apart from the inside out. At some point, just before dawn, I whispered goodbye. Not out loud, just in my head, quiet and final, like crossing something off a list I never thought I'd have to make. By Sunday afternoon, we were back in the city. On Monday morning, I filed the papers. I didn't tell her right away. I wanted them done. I wanted them real. No, maybe we can work through this. No bargaining. The day I got the documents back from my attorney, I went home early. I cleaned the kitchen, took out the trash, folded the laundry, normal things, quiet things. Then I took the envelope and placed it on the kitchen table, right between the salt shaker and her favorite lavender-scented candle. I didn't write a note, didn't need to. When she came home that evening, I was already upstairs. I heard the keys drop, the footsteps stop, the silence stretch. Then I heard her voice, tight and trembling. "Mark." I didn't respond. A minute later, she came into the bedroom, papers in hand. "Are you serious?" she said. "You can't just." "I already did," I said, folding a shirt into a suitcase. "It's done." She stared at me. "But we went to the lake. We talked. We had wine. We said nothing," I said. "And that said everything." She stepped closer. "Please don't do this. We can figure it out. I'll stop seeing him. I'll go to therapy. Whatever you want." I turned to face her. "You already made your choice, Emily. I'm just making mine." She flinched. And then the anger came. She shouted, cried, said I was being dramatic, that I was throwing everything away over a mistake. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just kept packing. Later that week, at another company dinner, she showed up uninvited. She made sure to sit near me, made sure everyone heard her joke. Better to marry a wallet than a man, right? People laughed. Uncomfortably, awkwardly. The kind of laugh you give when you don't know where the landmines are. I didn't say a word. That was the moment I stopped trying to fix anything. That was the last nail. From that day forward, I walked away without noise, and I never looked back. The weeks after I filed for divorce were surreal. Emily didn't move out right away. She insisted she needed time to figure things out. Logistics, finances, a place to stay. Could have pushed. I probably should have. But part of me wanted to see what she would do when the curtain finally fell. Would she try to fix anything? Would she finally admit it, fully and without excuse? Or would she keep up the act? The answer came quickly. She smiled more, asked if I wanted coffee in the mornings, cleaned obsessively, made dinner like we were still just tired professionals trying to survive the workweek together. It was all routine, mechanical kindness, but the truth lived in the cracks. Her phone was still always face down. She kept it on silent now, and I noticed how her eyes darted toward it when it vibrated once, twice, then never again while I was in the room. She still showered at night, but now the door stayed locked. She never locked it before, ever. That was new. She wore different perfume every few days, almost as if she was trying on identities. One day it was jasmine, the next a warm vanilla, and once it was the exact cologne Thomas wore. I'd only smelled it once at the office when we shook hands during a project meeting, but I knew it immediately. Spicy, sharp, masculine. She caught me sniffing the air once and said it was just something from a sample set she'd gotten online. Sure. She still said Thomas's name too often, like she wanted to normalize it. Thomas said this funny thing at lunch. Or, Thomas is going to New York next week. Like she was testing me. Like she wanted to see if I'd react. I didn't. What was there left to react to? One night, I came home from work to find her in the kitchen, barefoot, cooking pasta. She turned and smiled as if we were still playing house. "How was your day?" she asked, like it mattered. "Fine. Want a glass of wine?" I shrugged. "Sure." She poured it, handed it to me, then leaned against the counter with that faraway look she got when she was mentally elsewhere. "Mark?" she asked after a moment. I sipped the wine. "Yeah. Do you think we ever really knew each other?" I stared at her. She didn't look at me when she asked. "I think," I said slowly, "I spent 10 years knowing a version of you who, at the very least, didn't lie to my face." She nodded like she'd expected that. Then, without another word, she stirred the sauce and changed the subject. I slept in the guest room after that. Every night. She didn't protest. It was like living with a ghost. One who wore my wife's face but none of her truth. I started building my own exit plan. Quietly, carefully. I opened a separate bank account. Started putting away portions of my paycheck, bit by bit. Bookmarked listings for short-term rentals. Made a spreadsheet of moving costs. Scanned through legal documents until my head hurt. I consulted with my lawyer weekly, making sure every I was dotted, every T crossed. Meanwhile, she continued the act. She cried sometimes. Not often. Usually at night, in the bathroom with the door closed. Muffled sobs I pretended not to hear. I don't know if they were for me, or for the version of herself she thought she lost. Or maybe she just cried because the fantasy had cracked. Once, she left her laptop open on the couch while she went to shower. I wasn't trying to snoop, not really. But something compelled me to look. A reflex born out of months of questions with no answers. There was an open chat thread. "Thomas." The messages were recent. Nothing overly S***zool. No photos. But it was the tone that hit me. The way they spoke. Easy. Comfortable. Like they'd been doing it for a long time. "Can't wait for this to be over," she typed. "He's being colder than usual, which actually helps. No more guilt." Then a reply from him. "It's better this way. Less mess. I want us to start fresh. No shadows." I closed the laptop. I didn't bring it up. She hadn't said my name in that conversation. Not once. Just he. Like I was a character in a story she was done telling. The next day, she suggested we try couples counseling. I almost laughed. Instead, I said, "No thanks." She looked at me, eyes red but dry. "So you're really just giving up?" "Emily," I said quietly, "I gave everything I had. You gave it to someone else." She flinched but didn't respond. Another day, I caught her on the phone in the backyard. She thought I was still at work. I watched through the window. She laughed. A real laugh, one I hadn't heard in months. Not since before Thomas. It hurt more than anything else. Not because she was happy. Because she didn't even bother to hide it anymore. The mask was slipping, and she didn't care. That weekend, I told her I'd be gone for a few days. "A work trip," I said. She nodded absently. Said, "Drive safe." In reality, I'd rented a small cabin 2 hours out. I needed space. Silence. Somewhere to feel the full weight of everything I'd been swallowing. The first night there, I sat on the porch with a bottle of bourbon and just breathed. It was the first time in months that I didn't feel like I was performing grief. I was actually living it. I cried. I don't care how it sounds. I cried like I hadn't cried since my father died. I cried until my head ached and my throat was raw. Not just for Emily, but for the version of myself I had been. The man who believed love and loyalty were enough. Who thought being steady and kind would guarantee being chosen. He was gone. When I came back home, something in me had shifted. Emily noticed immediately. "You seem different," she said, watching me unpack. I didn't respond. That night, I moved all of my clothes into the guest room. Organized them neatly. Took down the old wedding photo from my dresser and replaced it with a small framed print of a mountain range I'd always wanted to hike. She saw it the next morning and said nothing. She started sleeping later, leaving earlier. One night, she didn't come home at all. Texted me that she was staying with a friend because of early meetings. I didn't ask who. Didn't care. She had already left in every way but physical. And maybe I had too. When I told my lawyer I wanted to speed things up, she asked if I was sure. I'm past sure, I said. I just want out. She fast-tracked the filings. Sent over the revised division of assets. Emily barely contested anything. Just signed where she was told. Almost like she was relieved. The night she signed the last document, I cooked dinner for myself. Just me. A simple stir-fry with way too much garlic. She came home, smelled it, and smiled weakly. Smells like the early days, she said. Yeah, I replied. Before things got complicated. We ate in separate rooms. Later that night, she knocked on the guest room door. I opened it halfway. She stood there in an old sweatshirt, her eyes glassy but clear. I know I don't have the right to ask, she said. But can I hug you? I hesitated. Then finally I nodded. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me like someone clinging to a version of the past she couldn't get back. I hugged her back. But I didn't close my eyes. And I didn't feel anything. When she let go, I stepped back. Good night, Emily. Good night, Mark. It was the last real conversation we ever had. The morning Emily moved out, it rained. A steady, whispering kind of rain. The kind that taps softly on windows and makes the whole world feel like it's exhaling. She was already packing when I came downstairs. Hair tied up, hoodie on, not a trace of makeup. She looked younger somehow, not happier, just stripped down. Her suitcase was by the door. 2 boxes sat on the floor beside it, sealed with packing tape. One was labeled bathroom, the other books. I didn't say much. I didn't offer to help carry anything out. Neither did she ask. We moved around each other like roommates on their final morning, cordial, careful, detached. She poured herself coffee and asked, Want me to leave the key on the counter? That's fine, I said. There was a long pause. One of those spaces where something should be said but neither person is willing to say it. Finally, she added, You're going to be okay, Mark. I know you will. I looked at her then, really looked, and I realized she wasn't saying it for me. She was saying it for herself. To ease her own guilt. To convince herself she hadn't completely ruined someone she once loved. I didn't give her the satisfaction. I already am, I said and walked out of the room. I heard the door close 10 minutes later. She was gone. And just like that, it was done. The silence that followed was different than the silence we'd lived in for months. This one wasn't tense or suffocating. It wasn't heavy with avoidance or thinly veiled resentment. It was clean, still, full of space. I walked back into the kitchen and found the key she'd left behind, sitting neatly on the counter next to the salt shaker, right where the divorce papers had been weeks ago. A quiet, fitting end. I slid the key into the junk drawer and closed it. Then I started moving forward. The first thing I did was strip the house of every reminder. The wedding photo over the fireplace. Down. The his and hers coffee mugs. Boxed up. Her favorite blanket on the couch. Laundered. Folded. Tucked away in the closet I no longer needed to share. The hardest part was the bedroom. Our bedroom. I stood in the doorway for a while before I touched anything. It felt like a museum exhibit frozen in time. Her perfume still lingered on the pillowcase. A drawer was half open, left as if she meant to come back. I almost closed it gently out of habit. But then I caught myself. This wasn't hers anymore. This wasn't ours anymore. I opened every drawer, cleared every shelf, scrubbed every surface. I flipped the mattress, bought new sheets, hung different curtains. I didn't realize how much of her had been embedded into the space until I started pulling it all out like weeds. It was exhausting, but also strangely energizing. I turned the guest room into an office. I painted the living room a different color. I rearranged the furniture, not because I needed to, but because I could. One Friday night, about 2 weeks after she left, I sat on the floor of the newly cleaned living room, eating cheap Chinese takeout straight from the box. No TV, no phone. Just me, the rustle of chopsticks, and the quiet hum of my own breathing. It was the most peace I'd felt in years. People started asking how I was doing. I told them I was fine. First, that was a lie. But eventually, it started to feel true. I went back to the gym, bought a new pair of running shoes. I started jogging again. Slow, awkward, painful laps around the neighborhood. But each one felt like a reclaiming. I'd spent years sitting at a desk or on a couch, slowly fading into the background of my own life. Now I was sweating, sore, alive. I reconnected with old friends, grabbed beers, laughed in ways I hadn't in a long time. When I told them what happened, most weren't surprised. "We always liked Emily," one said carefully. "But, yeah, she seemed different the last few years." Another added, "It always felt like she was looking for something else." I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't need to. Turns out, everyone sees the cracks. They just don't say anything until the house collapses. Around that time, I got a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. It was Thomas. He didn't leave a long message. Just said, "Hey man, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything." I deleted it, not out of anger, just because it didn't matter. There's no apology that can unburn a bridge. I never responded. Emily texted me once. Just one time. A short message. "I hope you're doing okay." I didn't reply. She didn't follow up. I assumed she was still seeing Thomas, though I didn't care enough to confirm. Whatever fantasy they had built probably felt less exciting now that it was out in the open. That's how it goes, isn't it? Sneaking around feels like a spark, until reality flicks the lights back on. From what little I heard through the grapevine, they didn't last. A friend at work said Thomas transferred again, this time to San Diego. Emily, I assumed, stayed here. The city was hers long before it was ours. I didn't ask for more details. I didn't want them. It felt like the difference between reopening a wound and letting it scar over. One evening, while going through an old storage bin in the garage, I found a photo album, thick, dusty, tucked behind boxes I hadn't touched in years. I sat on the concrete floor and flipped through it. Vacations, birthdays, random Sunday mornings, smiles, so many smiles. But none of it made me cry. None of it made me angry. It just made me feel quiet, like looking at someone else's life. A closed chapter, a different version of myself. I closed the album and slid it back into the bin. Not out of denial, just because I was